Wonderful. Well, good morning to everybody, both here on Zoom and the Policy Review Committee, and those watching us on Facebook. We'll start with the call to order. Eric, roll call.
Chair Brown.
Here.
Board Member Cole.
Present.
Board Member Pierce. Ms. Klein.
Here.
Ms. Ellingson.
Present.
Ms. Holt.
Here.
Mr. Holt. Mr. Holt, sorry.
Here.
I get in a pattern. Ms. White.
It's all right. It's all right.
Ms. White has indicated as waving to me that she is here.
Here.
You have a quorum, sir.
Very good. Was not always easy to achieve this when we were meeting live.
That's very true.
Great. Well, the first item of business is the approval of minutes from January 9. And it's been, 3 months since we last met. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes as submitted.
We need a second.
Second.
All in favor? Or is it going to work like that? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. We've got a number of items on the agenda. Let me just mention everything. Does everybody have a copy of the agenda?
It should all be on board docs. Hopefully you all have access to that on your devices here.
Items.
I can also pull it up here briefly.
Oh, why don't you do that? All right, there's the agenda, and on the far left are the items that we plan to address today. Move on to just a conversation about states of emergency and whether there's anything additional we should consider to make sure that the policies don't interfere, I guess, or if there are some policies that we may want to add to provide. Then finally, we'll get to the equity policy, which has been obviously a long time coming. Let's go to the first of those, the review of board bylaws. I suspect no one has actually taken out. There are some things that we probably should address. I don't think we've done that we've done minor changes, but we've not done anything significant with it. And it's an area where we're more likely to want to put things needed for emergency, make sure that you don't have any problems there. And one of the very specific things that I'd like us to discuss and address is the quorum, or the vote requirement, I guess, for a change in bylaws. At some point in the past, and I don't know whether Michael may be the only person on the call who remembers, or perhaps Phil, but the bylaws require 6 out of 7 board members to agree. before we can make a change. That's a very high supermajority requirement. Most matters, including policy changes, require a majority. Supermajority, majority with our 7-member board is 4. A supermajority would, or Michael, do you have any recollection of the history?
No, actually, I do not. That is something that precedes me. Even in our Neola revisions, this is something that either was just, ongoingly adopted, but I don't, that's interesting. This is one of the rare instances where I don't have any kind of historical recollection of that.
Okay. Is there anybody on who does? And or in that, any thoughts?
My thought is that a supermajority should constitute, in any circumstance, 5 or more. 5 to 6. I think the 6 threshold is a bit high to be able to change our bylaws. I can imagine that I understand why this could possibly be the case. I mean, this is kind of thinking of this like a constitutional change. Joel and some of us who are on the call who understand how that process works in the State House. I kind of get it, but I think it's overkill in this instance. I think a supermajority should constitute the 5 number. I'll use our taxing authority, right, as just one of those examples. So for us to be able to put anything on the ballot as a board, we take recommendations and then we have to vote by supermajority to pass those. Well, what should make the bylaw situation any different? That's just my thought.
Anybody else?
I believe that the Neola, when they provided the template, gave certain options. They gave you a 2/3, which would be your 5, or 3/4, which would be your 6. And the current board at that time opted for the 3/4 majority. I don't have a rationale why that decision was made, but it was one of the options provided to them. I agree with Board Member Cole. I think that as they were looking at trying to think of it in terms of the bylaws being more of the structure and the framework for how the board operates, that they wanted that higher threshold so that it really did take almost unanimity in order to make any of the changes to the bylaws.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just that I think that's just how it is.
Okay. There are a fair number of provisions, fair number of bylaws. And my thought was that we take a look at this as a whole. And I don't think that we're ready necessarily to work through all of this here. I think this might be a really good matter for a subcommittee. And I think we're going to get to subcommittees on some other things as well. Is there anybody interested in working on a subcommittee to review the bylaws?
I'm happy to support any way I can.
As am I.
Wonderful.
I would be happy to do that too.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we've got three folks. Does anybody have some additional thoughts for giving direction to our subcommittee?
I think that as a whole, this was something that we really wanted to make sure that we have strong bylaws to govern, and that's something that this new board coming in really wanted to focus on. So you digging through it, really, taking time to think about what makes us stronger is very much appreciated. I also know that a lot of what we have is the Neola template, and Eric, you can cover your ears for a second. Eric Roush. We may need to add other things. I mean, I don't want to stick to a template. I want to make sure we're doing things that matter and have impact. I also think that we need to, see what our friends at different levels of government are doing. I think we can share some best practices. So, be creative in how you approach this, and know that this is something that's very important to the full board and how we move forward in governing. Eric Roush or Chair Brown, I thought maybe it might be good just to take a moment, since we actually have people watching us this early in the morning. They might not understand just the structure of our bylaws, because you're saying bylaws, but we have a lot of other policies in there. Maybe a quick review of what we're actually asking the committee, the subcommittee, to look at in terms of how our policies work.
Good idea. Eric, is that something you want to address?
Certainly. So the bylaws, for those who are unfamiliar with them, are essentially the skeletal framework from which the board operates. And they kind of take care of a lot of the housekeeping items that exist. It talks about the various authorities and powers that the Board of Education has, but their legislative and their judicial and their executive authority. It lays out kind of the meeting structure, how meetings are to be, how executive session works. A lot of the more technical pieces, if it exists in statute, are recited here, but there's a lot of things that's silent in statute, and so then that gives the board the opportunity to kind of flesh out how they wish to operate, whether that comes down to public participation in meetings, the organizational meeting, which is required by law. The board has opted to add a number of other items they want to cover at that organizational meeting. It's not required that they cover those particular items necessarily, but that the board has opted to do that in the past. Other things we've talked about here in the past, travel, board travel, how that works, how the development in that way, emergency meetings, how the policies are amended. It kind of covers all those structural pieces for how the board governs itself, compensation, all of those items. And so President Adair is right. There's probably items that a district this large from that doesn't exist, because Neola, the gamut from the district that's a few hundred students all the way to us in Ohio, the largest school district. And so those needs are vastly different. A lot of other school districts don't have in-house counsel. They don't have folks doing policy. They don't have the level of structure and the depth that we have in terms of expertise. And so they sometimes need a little bit more help from Neola. That's why they provide those templates. And so we have the ability and the expertise, I think, to reach out and figure out and identify what other areas do we need, or what would be beneficial to the board, so as to improve its efficacy and improve its efficiency in its operation.
Great. And I agree that this is particularly important. The way we're operating matters. We do have the way board meetings run, thanks to our president this year, and that's been good. When you're looking at this, use a lot of creativity. Don't be stuck on anything that says this is either how it's been done forever, or that you're overly concerned about whether we can do something or not. Just getting some good ideas that the subcommittee can report to this group will be good because we'll work through those. Yours is just, the first level of review. And if anybody else on the committee wants to take a look and send any thoughts to the subcommittee, please do that. This is it's a good sized chunk of work, but it's also important across the board. Do we have some other thoughts? All right. And for the subcommittee, this is one that I have a lot of interest in. So please include me with your meetings, and I will join as I'm able.
Very good. Either I'll be in touch with you or Misty Nichols, who's the board liaison. Misty's on today. Go ahead and wave, Misty. One of the two of us in touch with those of you who've indicated interest in serving on the subcommittee, and we'll go ahead and get scheduled. I hope.
Wonderful. Moving to our next agenda item is a question that everybody everywhere is facing right now, and that is what, if anything, do we need to do because of the current state of emergency? The biggest thing that directly affected the board was the opportunity to meet this way, virtually, rather than in person. The law had required in-person meetings only, and even with people that called in, they could participate or not at the discretion of the chair or the president in the case of the board as a whole, but could not vote, could not be counted for purposes of quorum. And the law was just changed, House Bill 197, to allow for virtual meetings. And it applies to both the board as a whole and to all of our committees. The question is that, in our current climate, the state of emergency, are there other changes needed to anything in the bylaws or policy? We do have a provision that deals with emergencies. Eric, do you have a quick reference for that?
I just crossed the wrong way there. My apologies.
Quite all right. And we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but there is.
I think that, go ahead.
I believe that there's something, and I'll try to find it quickly, but that provides some additional discretion, and I think it's a time that we want to allow the superintendent as much discretion as needed to deal with emergencies, and that's something that I think is already in here.
Under the purchasing policy, there's certainly provisions to be made for emergencies. So there is that provision within the policy. As far as kind of the structure and the running of the meeting, the meeting structure is kind of laid out, but there could be some additional flexibility depending upon what needed to happen or how we may to go forward if the need arises. Virtual meetings again, and the General Assembly allows that either on a temporary or permanent basis, because right now the ability to do virtual meetings is allowed only through December 1st. And then that authority lapses. There is discussion at the General Assembly to at least extend this upwards of these at universities, and I would not be surprised if after all of this that there may be some additional discussion on adding other local governments to that piece of legislation going forward. there are other it's going to depend upon what the state of the emergency is, oftentimes, and sometimes it's going to still rely upon what the General Assembly and the governor can be act through legislation. So trying to anticipate that is certainly a challenge. I think that if there's a way to either have I guess a one-stop shop or a single policy or bylaw can reference, that may be somewhat helpful. So that could be a.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a pandemic plan in the operations policies, right?
There is a pandemic
Yes.
plan, that is correct. And so the pandemic plan, but the pandemic plan doesn't really give the authority to supersede, I think, a lot of board policy. And unless one wants to construe that, I could certainly ask our legal counsel if he thinks that the creation of that pandemic plan does so, but the pandemic plan doesn't come back to the Board of Education for approval. That policy directs the superintendent to go ahead and develop that plan. So it could be a part of that plan. It could be an addendum to that policy. It could be, but that's a pandemic. There's other kinds of states of emergency that certainly could exist as well. And so I think reviewing the policies, are there certain areas or there certain things that we would maybe need to suspend on a temporary basis? That could certainly be. I think that's what the chair is referring to. Are there, and can we kind of amalgamate those into a single policy or a single bylaw, so that when that state of emergency is declared by either the local health department or by the mayor or by the governor or by the president, that kind of kicks into gear, so that we don't have to come back to the board and ask for certain policies to be suspended on a at every other meeting. That may still occur from time to time because of actions of the General Assembly, but is there a way to have a single place, a single policy that kind of references all that, so that folks don't have section to section to section to section trying to identify what those are?
So, Michael, I don't know if you're trying to talk, but you're on mute. I was just going to say that it might be good just to talk about really quick what we have had to do in this situation so far. So the board did have to come in and adjust some of the policies. We gave the superintendent some authority over hiring during this. We also are currently kind of in a challenge with looking at purchase limits. The board has to approve purchases over a certain level. And so we're kind of looking at, we might have a challenge to that coming up. And so there are a couple situations. I feel like there was another one on, and I don't know, this is more on her side of things, but the academic stuff, we gave her some more air. Ralph, she might want to jump in there. But so those are the ones so far we've had to kind of think through, and we've implemented. This could also be something in that bylaws committee that you look through, and when you're going through that, figuring out, is there something in there that if in any kind of emergency, not just pandemic, I mean, it could be something else too, what may need to be added in there. But, I don't think so far we haven't gotten super tripped up on anything other than being able to meet virtually, which wasn't a problem. We've been able to work through things. But again, it is challenging, if there is a state of emergency declared, it could be nice just to have one policy that says these policies are impacted, including raising the limit for purchasing or giving the superintendent automatic authority to hire at a certain level or something.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I like what Jennifer proposed. There are two places in which we can consider in the bylaws specifically this idea of being able to meet virtually as well, to include that into provision. There are two places. One is the regular meeting policy provision, and the other is special meetings. So I think we can design some language, we can draft language that otherwise says that under certain circumstances, conditions of emergency, what have you, board members can meet virtually and vote by, regular voting standards, majority, so on and so forth. I think there are two places where that can reside. And then I still think that we develop some sort of language, as Jennifer, kind of alluded to, that we look at some other areas, a particular area where we're giving certain authority to the board to be able to be able to do certain things or designate certain things through administrative guideline to the superintendent, treasurer, and internal auditor. We have to include all three of our direct reports.
Do we know if there's any other districts that have a state of emergency plan? And the thought that came to me was New York City after 9/11, if their school district had or put into place any sort of state of emergency policy that would allow the board to just automatically delegate certain things to the superintendents, or even to a building level.
I know that there's some organizations that we're partnered with, National School Board Association, Council of Great City Schools has always been an awesome resource for us. We can certainly make inquiry there. Yeah, we can turn that around fairly quickly. Dr. Roush?
I will reach out.
Thank you.
Yeah, that will make sense, as well as perhaps to contact the school board in New York City directly and ask. I think those inquiries are helpful and important. The policy that first brought this question to mind, at least for me, was as we were thinking about how we do board meetings, and before we had the ability to do virtual, and working on that, was the question of public participation. And can we? I guess we had one board meeting where it was where we discouraged the public from attending in person. The seven of us, actually 6 of us, were able to make it. Sat in the large room in the basement, spread out across the whole room, so that we were well distanced physically. And we wanted to discourage the public at that time, but we knew we needed for the public to be able to watch us and do our meeting in the public. Same thing today with this. Now that we have the authority to do virtual, we had to make provision for people to watch us. We're doing that with Facebook. But as that question first arose, we realized that our policy, actually a bylaw on public participation, and where we allow somebody to come and speak to the board for up to 4 minutes, would need to be accommodated in some way. And a careful look at that told us near the very end of it that the presiding officer may waive these rules. So it was already taken care of. We didn't need to rush in to suspend the policy. But that's the type of thing that we need to watch for. And as we're doing this, I think that we also need to give thought to not going overboard. That we don't want to just say, look, superintendent's got complete authority to do anything that she wants to do during the period of emergency. If there's something that we want to empower her to do that needs to be done instantly, then there should be some kind of a requirement that she report to the board as quickly as possible, that she's taken that action. And I don't know all the circumstances where that kind of thing is needed. It's just a matter of really thinking and looking and paying attention to what the experience has been. We've got a month that we have been operating in this way under an emergency declaration by the governor and the mayor, and we and it may be that maybe the policy is fine, but I think it deserves a good look. Policy will need to define perhaps what an emergency is, whether it's a mayoral or governor or Department of Health declaration or presidential, and see what makes sense for us. And when the emergency ends, is it during the state and we have to await a further termination of the state of emergency or something else? Other thoughts?
Hi, yes. I just have one. I think if we look at the governmental entities that are doing a good job right now, it's the ones who are really committing to being open and communicating with the public. The worst thing in a crisis is just to not know what's in front of you and what's happening and how governments are responding. So I think as you would lay out a policy about this, it should have a really thorough commitment to how Columbus City Schools intends to also live out that high level of communication to the public.
I agree completely, and thank you. At least from my perspective, one of the great examples has been our governor and Dr. Amy Acton. And they've been extremely open and forthcoming and doing that authentically every single day and posting a lot of good information online. I think that's one example that we should keep in mind. And they've been praised for it everywhere. And there are certainly others. Other thoughts? Once again, I think that this, unless this group decides that everybody should be on this, it may be a good one to do with a subcommittee. Anybody interested in doing that? Michael, you? Okay. Good. Good. Others?
There may be some other board members that may want to participate, so.
I agree.
I'll reach out.
Yeah.
I'll reach out to the rest of the board, or Misty, the rest of the board, and having them see who's interested. Thank you.
Yeah, and with a month's experience, we should reach out to the administrative team at least, perhaps even a bit more broadly, to inquire whether there's anything that they've encountered where the policy has made it challenging for them to do what they need to do.
I'll reach out and bring that to their attention and see if there's anything that we've missed thus far.
Okay. All right, and certainly with this, as with anything else, if any of you who are not directly working on this, have something that you want to point us to, that you want to identify, please do that. all of you are familiar with how the policies work and somewhat what's in here. So please don't hesitate to pass along your thoughts.
The only individual that I noted was Board Member Cole. Is there anybody else interested in kind of tackling this particular issue? Or I know Kelsey's, I think, on every subcommittee already that we've established.
I was going to say at some point I will need to stop signing up for these. I'm happy to help with this one too, but you guys will get sick of me soon.
I'm happy to help as well.
Thanks, Emily. The other inquiry that we should make is to our unions, CEA, OPSI, and ask specifically whether they or their members have encountered some things where we should take a look. Phil? Don't know whether Phil's still on, but we should do that.
Board Member Brown, I'm here. I think that would be a good topic of conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anything else on this agenda item? If any of you decides that you do want to volunteer on this subcommittee, just please let us know. Let me know, or Eric, or Michael. Thank you. And now finally we'll turn to the equity policy. This has been some time in coming for a number of reasons. We do not currently have an equity policy. The reasons for that are in history. At least a few years when the Neola policies were first adopted, when we first signed up with them. And I don't know that we need to inquire about how or why that may have occurred, but we have the opportunity now to enact a good policy, equity policy that existed before it disappeared. And all of you have had that, but we also have samples of policies from Seattle, from now Michael just forwarded a policy from Portland Public Schools. And I know that equity is probably really good to address now because of all the discussion in connection with our crisis. Because we've switched to online teaching, online learning, the essential thing is to make sure that every student has access to a computer, to Wi-Fi, and that's simply not always the case. It takes the disparities that we have to eliminate and highlights or underscores those to the point where we've got to take, and we have been taking, extraordinary steps to provide computers and to provide Wi-Fi access in a number of ways. Our policy probably should, cover that kind of situation. But more importantly, it just shows that, yeah, we really do have disparities. I think when the curriculum audit comes out, there will be a number of other examples that we can identify. And to cover those. We also had been awaiting the arrival of a chief of equity. I think that's going to happen in the near future. But it's fair, and we should get started with this even before that person's arrival. We may get some additional input. We hope to get additional input after that person's on board. But why don't we get started with it? Some initial thoughts from any of you?
Just very quickly, there was a time that, yes, the district, and long before any of us who are current board members became board members, Columbus City Schools led the country at one point in time in developing an equity policy. And this was under the time of the superintendency of Dr. Gene Harris. This is when this policy was developed. Neola did its revisions. I don't understand how we lost track of it, but what I can say is this, is where there might have been a removal or loss or withdrawal, I don't know, of that policy, the board and the organization as a whole adopted behaviors and incorporated behaviors that ensured equitable treatment of students and staff. One of those ways that we aggressively began to do that you can see once we pull that language up, is incorporated in the Portland Public Schools policy for racial equity and social justice. Was one, we adopted restorative practices. Another was we became very aggressive at identifying students of color who were gifted and talented. We adopted other social emotional practices, if you will, and policies that incorporated that, how we look at academics and all these other things that are part of our day-to-day operations. So where we might have had this temporary loss of a policy, we have not, under any circumstances, lost our focus on equitable treatment of students and staff. So I just wanted to make sure we included that in the conversation.
I think that's fair. I think that society in general and you know, certainly within the school district and in our community, there's been an increasing awareness of equitable matters and an increasing understanding of what that means, and that we've operated in that fashion, but we've still got ways to go. We can do better, and I think the equity we're talking about is not solely a matter of race, but across the board. Any of the protected areas, any place where we're treating people differently. We've also, as a board, in our goals, in our mission, make reference to equity. We've committed to it. And I don't know that it needs to be said necessarily, but it needs to be included in the policy, and that is an explanation of what we mean. It means folks that have fewer resources may be given more. It clearly does not mean equal treatment. If we've got, computers. It's not that we give computers to every single person. It's that we focus on giving computers to those who need them the most, who are unable to acquire one or have access. So the one thing it does not mean, and I think the policy should say so explicitly, is that it's not the same as equal.
This is Emily here. Just I agree with literally all of the above by both of you. I just wanted to say though, in terms of pure drafting and in terms of the substance of the policy, I really thought that of the 4 that we have for consideration, including other districts and our proposed language, I thought that the Seattle one, in terms of draftsmanship, I think really hits the right tone. I like that it puts our goals and values up front, while also acknowledging that equity doesn't equal equality and that resource limitations might come into play, and that there are many different fields where equity is going to come into play. I just think it's literally drafted better, while also covering almost all the grounds that our current proposed policy would.
I just wanted to quickly say, because I do work in this field, that there's different ways to consider the question of equity, and I think that our policy, the old policy, is very focused, as it should be, on what we can control internally. But I think the question and the harder part that we're facing right now in this crisis is how this question of equity is a social impact. And how is it that a school district fits into that overall structure of creating an equitable society? And so I don't know if or how the policy should address that, but that's actually a bigger challenge in our exact moment than what is very important, how we conduct our business. So just thinking about it maybe on a couple different levels. I didn't get I'll look at the Seattle policy, but just kind of thinking that through, like how do we continue to be part of the bigger systematic change for equity for our entire society as a piece of the school district. And so I'd really like us to think about that and challenge that, because that's exactly where we are right now. Things that we can control, like discipline and extracurricular and how we communicate with families, that's all so important too. But we know that actually doesn't holistically move us forward.
If I can chime in, I'm not quite sure what you're asking for. I think inherently public education, particularly Columbus City Schools here, we are a pillar in this community. We are a pillar that has a holistic impact across the board for quality of life already. Inherently we do. And I'll give just one simple example. If we're looking at us as a municipal institution, folks come or leave a city based on their education system, and we play a role in that through taxing, through any number of things. So just looking at our across the board influence there. But certainly as you're talking about the idea of fairness, right? Fairness and being judicious, being prudent in how we execute our day-to-day operations, it makes every bit of sense. I think what I want to definitely caution us to do is stay on point with what our message and what our mission and our vision are. Our mission to ensure each student is highly educated, prepared for leadership and service, and empowered for success as a citizen in the global community. That we are on point with our vision statements that incorporate love of students, so on and so forth. I just don't want to try to become this when we're already magnanimous, we're already a noble organization doing noble work, suffer mission creep because we're trying to be something out of our bounds at the same time. I don't know if I don't know that that's what you're suggesting. I just want to be sure that we don't.
No, it's not actually. It is more what you're saying.
Okay.
It to have that recognition. I don't think that our policy should like dig deep into that, but some kind of recognition that, like you say, we are part of the bigger system, and that it is important. I mean, like for example, right now, we have an equity issue about trying to get our kids laptops. Well, we can get them laptops, but we have to work with other people in this system to get them connected to Wi-Fi. That's not something we do, but we're all part of the system. And so just some acknowledgement. Now, should that be in like a line by line written policy? No, but the idea that we're part, all of us together are part of this question and this concept of equity. And it's more of a challenge. It's not like write it in, but just kind of thinking about it with an umbrella view as we kind of dig into the policy with kind of a rewrite. I think that we do an amazing job, Michael. And I think that even though we haven't, like you mentioned, we haven't had a written policy, I do think these principles and practices of equity have certainly been utilized, and more so even now, right? And so it's just more about, let's take it a step further. Like, let's push a little bit harder, because if we are all committed to this, and we're demonstrating it right now, like, let's go ahead and just push a little bit. But I don't want to mission creep. I want to stay in our lane, but I want to recognize that we are part of a bigger system as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.
I do agree with both Jennifer and Michael on this. To some extent, I think that enacting a policy is really the board making a statement. It's don't know whether it's going to change our interest and our practices from what they've been, perhaps, but for the most part, it's going on record in a bit more formal way of saying, here's what we're committed to, here's what we plan to do, and telling the community and others that these things are important to us. Is there anybody that's had the opportunity? Emily, I obviously has with the Seattle policy and perhaps with all four. Anybody else have an opportunity yet to read through any of the others and have any thoughts about them? Is that something that like to do and bring back to the next meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to look over the other policies.
Does everybody have all four? I know the Portland one was just emailed an hour ago.
I'll get that distributed.
It was more than an hour. But
Yeah, I don't
Was it?
have the
Okay.
Portland one.
Also, we had scheduled a board retreat that we need to reschedule, that we as a board were going to discuss higher concepts of equity as well. So this may be a good time to also get those examples to the rest of the board, Dr. Rausch.
I'll make sure all board members and all members of the committee have all of the copies of the other district's policies that we have, as well as a copy of the policy before you today. That's the former CCS Board Policy.
Does anybody want to try to get into any specifics in the policy before that's done? My sense is probably not.
I just wanted to add one thing. This is Emily again. Once again, the Seattle one, I think it's very well drafted, and I think it also has a lot of person first language, and really covers disability rights, disability equity in a very good way. So as long as we're including all equity there, I think that one does a very good job of recognizing many different areas.
Good. I think that's important. And I guess based on that, please, all of you pay special attention to the Seattle policy and how that differs from the policy that we used to have here in Columbus, the one that's under discussion. Additional thoughts? At one point, I was thinking that this too might be something that would make sense for a subcommittee, but at this, I'm not sure that's true anymore. I think partly that this one's big enough, important enough that really like to see all of us, and I think it's doable. If everybody will take a look at the at least the 4 policies and come to the next meeting prepared to really get into it and try to fashion something. If any one of you in particular wants to propose something specific that they'd like to see us do, please do that as well. It'd be helpful if somebody wants to do that, to get it to us far enough in advance that people really have a chance to look at it and digest it for discussion.
This is Kelsey.
Yes.
One, I want to say that I agree with you that I think this policy is important enough that it deserves all of the minds on this committee to be working on it. So I agree with that recommendation. I'm also really looking forward to Remember Adair's participation in this, because I know that in her other work, this is something that she does to help organizations really put equity, diversity, and inclusion into action in their everyday business. So you mentioned it yourself, Chair Brown, before, that this is a policy. We can write the best thing, and it will be virtual, so it won't actually collect us, but figuratively it could. Drafting an equity policy is an opportunity to rally the massive organization that CCS is and its community, the whole city, in a conversation about what deconstructing racism, its legacies from the past, and what is happening right now together. So I think that this should be a very active conversation, engaging conversation that's open, perhaps to more than just us. There is one thing that I'm just sitting with as I've read through the policies. It's about access. It's a common theme in the policies, and I just think access is very important, but also we need something that's even more active than that. We need to bring in our students who are suffering from a lack of equity in ways that are beyond your control. But this has to be, we should establish something that really reaches students, to pull them in and connect them to the resources that you create. It's not enough to have resources that they need. We must, but it has to be a spirit of high expectations, like I've read also multiple times, and connecting students actively to what will help them succeed and thrive. So very much looking forward to this conversation too.
Great. I too would welcome and appreciate as much help as Jennifer can provide as possible. She is an expert.
Given Kelsey's comments, and it sort of rang a bell with me, when we get to a point that we have some language that we are comfortable with, or at least are thinking about proposing, what is the sense, Chair Brown, of having community meetings to talk about an equity policy?
Well, I don't think that that's a matter that's been given any thought yet. But this is an area that's important enough that it may make sense to do that. And I think as we work through this, we should consider that. That this perhaps is a standalone item is something that we might want to take out into the community and beyond just the school community to see what others think and to make sure that people understand what our values are in this area and have an opportunity for input. Yeah, let's keep that in mind. I think also we want to. There's other internal groups that we may want to make sure, as we have a proposal, as we have something that we've got to that the committee is comfortable with, get out to some other internal groups for their thoughts. And finally, this is an area that board members need to, all participate in it to some degree. I think simply keeping the entire board informed of our work as we go and providing opportunities for board members who are not part of this committee to weigh in, pass along their thoughts would be helpful.
Can see your colleague, board member Ragland, actively commenting on the live stream, and I don't make it a point to speak for him, but I think that he would appreciate that very much.
I can't imagine tackling this item without hearing from James, and I welcome very interested in hearing his input, his thoughts.
It may also be good. I like that idea, since we do have our new equity officer coming on. That's also a good way to introduce that person and get them out and understanding. So I appreciate that idea.
Yeah, that's good.
Sorry, just one note. I am watching the feed just to see if there are questions that are coming up as we're talking, and I can see a friend of mine, Kyle Strickland, who works with Kerwin, is bringing up how important it will be that if we are bringing on someone whose job, the equity officer, we probably want to engage them in this process. So even though I think we're all on this committee together because we are able to keep the pulse of each a different part of our community, I think someone whose actual job it is to bring this deliverable to the finish line should have a pretty big hand in its crafting too.
Absolutely, and at least that was one factor in my thinking for delaying when we got into this, and hopefully have that person on board to help lead us through this. But we really need to get started, and I think the timing is right for that person to come in and as you say, help us bring it to the finish line
I think Mr. Strickland and the Kerwin Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity would be an awesome partner in, helping either guide or participate in, community discussion virtually or otherwise. So thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Brother Strickland. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, I
It's
agree.
actually a good point because sometimes it's easier to have a third party moderator help lead those kind of really hard discussions. So, and I personally think that the Kerwin Institute Ohio State is amazing. I use them as a resource for all the work I do. And so, Kyle, I don't know if you were actually volunteering, but we certainly would appreciate all of your help.
If he wasn't, he just did.
And Kyle, I too would love your involvement in that of Kerwin. And if for whatever reason you're not available or have the time, I have no doubt that you can identify somebody else with Kerwin who can participate. I don't want to discourage you because I'd love to have your involvement. But I've had some good conversations with your director, and I know that there's some great resources there. So I would leave it to your good judgment to know, who best to help with us and how you can do that.
Just one additional thought from me. Joelle, and I liked your idea of some community meetings maybe around this. Just one thing to keep in mind is that the disparities that exist in our society also enable civic engagement for some and discourage it for others. So we're going to want to be really intentional about how we get all kinds of people in the room together to talk about what they need. Again, we can assume best intentions from everyone on this group, but I in no way assume to know, I wouldn't presume to know that I understand all the kinds of help that people need to be able to be making the most of their education. So we got to get those people in the room and make sure that we're hearing directly from them.
Agreed.
Thank you. Any other thoughts for this morning? All right. Please.
Really quickly,
yeah.
before
Go ahead, Eric.
if I may, I think that we've got a couple of subcommittees going, but we don't have any chairs of those subcommittees. Did you want to go ahead and take care of that housekeeping?
Sure, that would be good. I guess I'm fine allowing committees to select its own leader, but and I think that would be simple enough to do, and to I guess subcommittees should each plan to meet fairly quickly within the next week or two, and then let us know who's been selected to lead the subcommittee.
Misty and I will be reaching out to get those set up.
Good. Good. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you all. Appreciate it, and happy to have the opportunity to do a Zoom committee meeting. So thank you. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Well, thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
we will be
guys.
in touch.
Stay healthy.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
She couldn't resist.
I know the feeling, man.